Have you ever noticed how the day seems to start already exhausting? Before you even leave your bed, your mind is full. Messages, responsibilities, worries about money, work, the future. The world moves fast, and most people spend their entire lives reacting to that speed, never stopping long enough to truly think. But here's something strange. What if the real reason many people feel stuck in life isn't a lack of effort, but a lack of silence? Not long ago, there was a poor man whose life looked like it was going nowhere. Long hours of work, constant stress, bills that never seemed to end. From the outside, it looked like his biggest problem was money. But what he eventually discovered was something far more powerful. His life wasn't just chaotic on the outside, it was chaotic inside his mind. Then one small decision changed everything. He began waking up earlier than everyone else. Not to work harder, not to hustle more, but simply to sit in silence while the world was still asleep. What happened next slowly transformed his thinking, his opportunities, and eventually his entire destiny. And the most surprising part? The same quiet secret that changed his life might be something you could start tomorrow morning. So in this story, you'll discover how a few silent minutes before sunrise turned a struggling man's life around, and why the most powerful advantage in a noisy world might be the one thing almost nobody practices anymore. The world wakes up loud. Before the sun even touches the horizon, alarms buzz, phones vibrate, and the mind is already racing. Notifications flash, deadlines whisper, and responsibilities stack up like waves crashing against the shore. Most people haven't even taken their first breath of the day before their thoughts are scattered in 100 directions. And just like that, the day begins. Not with intention, but with reaction. For many, the morning doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like being dropped into the middle of a storm already in progress. Bills need paying, messages need answering, problems demand solutions. The mind jumps from worry to worry, never staying still long enough to see clearly. And somewhere deep inside, there's a quiet voice asking a troubling question. Is life supposed to feel this chaotic all the time? People try to push through it. They drink another cup of coffee, scroll through endless feeds, rush from one task to another, hoping productivity will somehow calm the noise. But strangely, the faster they move, the louder the mental clutter becomes. It's like trying to clear fog by running through it. The more they chase clarity, the further it seems to slip away. What most people don't realize is that the real exhaustion isn't physical, it's mental. The constant noise of modern life fills every empty space in the mind. Conversations, opinions, news, problems, comparisons, all swirling together into one overwhelming storm of thoughts. And when the mind never gets a moment of quiet, it slowly loses its ability to see the path ahead. Think about it for a moment. When was the last time you experienced true silence? Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of pressure, of expectations, of endless input from the outside world. For many people, that moment hasn't happened in years. The mind keeps running, day and night, like a machine that was never designed to stop. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. Decisions become rushed, emotions become reactive. Small problems start feeling enormous. Without realizing it, people begin living on mental autopilot, moving through routines, reacting to circumstances, but rarely stepping back to ask the bigger questions about their lives. And the strange part is this. The solution isn't always more effort, more hustle, or more information. Sometimes the mind doesn't need more input at all. Sometimes what it truly needs is space. A quiet space where thoughts can finally settle, like dust slowly falling to the ground. But in a world that celebrates constant motion, silence feels almost impossible to find. Yet somewhere, in the middle of all this noise and pressure, there was a man who discovered something unusual. Something so simple that most people overlook it completely. And his discovery would eventually change the direction of his entire life. Somewhere in that noisy world lived a man most people would never notice. He wasn't famous, powerful, or particularly lucky. Just a poor man doing his best to survive another day. Every morning he woke before the city fully stirred, not because he wanted to, but because life demanded it. Bills didn't wait, and neither did the long hours of work that barely kept him afloat. His days followed the same exhausting rhythm. Wake up, rush out the door, work until his body felt heavy, then return home with just enough energy to repeat it all again tomorrow. The money he earned was never quite enough. Something always broke. Some bill always appeared, some unexpected problem always arrived, and slowly, quietly, survival became his entire life. He often told himself things would get better someday, maybe next year, maybe after one lucky break, maybe after one opportunity finally appeared. But deep down, he carried a quiet fear that tomorrow might look exactly like today, and today looked exactly like yesterday. At night, when the world slowed down, his thoughts became louder. He would sit alone in a small room staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through unfinished worries. Rent, work, regret, missed chances, dreams he once had but could barely remember now. It felt like life had placed him inside a maze without giving him a map. And the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the long hours or the tired body. What truly weighed on him was the feeling of being mentally trapped. No clear direction, no quiet space to think, just an endless stream of worries colliding inside his head. Sometimes he would watch other people walking confidently through life, people who seemed calm, focused, certain about where they were going, and he couldn't help but wonder what they knew that he didn't. How did they make decisions so clearly while his own mind felt like a crowded room full of shouting voices? If someone had looked at him from the outside, they might have assumed his biggest problem was money. But the truth was deeper than that. The real struggle lived inside his mind, a constant noise that never stopped long enough for him to hear his own thoughts. And without realizing it yet, this invisible problem would soon lead him toward a discovery most people overlook their entire lives. Because before his life could change on the outside, something inside his mind first had to confront a painful truth. But that realization was still waiting for him. And it would arrive during a moment when the weight of everything finally became too heavy to ignore. Morning after morning, his life moved like a loop that refused to break. The alarm rang, his eyes opened, and before his feet even touched the floor, the worries were already there waiting. Bills, work, responsibilities. It felt as if his mind woke up tired before his body even had a chance to move. He would rush through the streets with the same familiar heaviness. Cars passing, people talking, phones ringing, horns echoing through the air. The entire world seemed to shout at once. Yet inside his head, the noise was even louder. Thoughts collided with each other like traffic in a city that never sleeps. Sometimes he tried to think about the future, but the moment he attempted to imagine a different life, the same doubts appeared. How would he change anything? Where would he even begin? The questions circled endlessly, but answers never seemed to arrive. The strange thing was that his days were full, yet his mind felt empty of direction. He worked hard, moved constantly, handled problem after problem, but none of it seemed to lead anywhere new. It was like running on a treadmill, effort everywhere, progress nowhere. At night, when the noise of the city softened, he would lie awake staring into the darkness, and that was when a quiet realization started to form. Maybe the real problem wasn't just the circumstances around him. Maybe the real problem was that his mind had no space to breathe, because every thought he had was immediately buried under another. Plans were interrupted by worries, ideas were crushed by doubts, moments of reflection were swallowed by exhaustion. His mind had become a crowded room where nothing could stay long enough to grow. The truth began to whisper to him slowly. If the mind is always filled with noise, how can it ever find clarity? If every moment is consumed by reaction, when does a person ever get the chance to truly think? But that realization was uncomfortable, because it forced him to confront something he had never admitted before. Perhaps the chaos in his life was a reflection of the chaos inside his own mind. And one night, that thought would hit him harder than ever before. A moment so heavy, so undeniable, that it would push him to the very edge of change. That night felt heavier than the others. The day had been long, exhausting in the kind of way that doesn't just tire the body, it drains the spirit. Work had stretched later than usual. Problems piled up faster than he could solve them, and by the time he finally returned home, the world still refused to quiet down. Outside his small window, the city kept roaring. Cars passed, distant voices echoed through the streets. Televisions hummed behind thin apartment walls. Even inside his room, silence seemed impossible to find. It was as if the noise of the world had followed him home and settled into every corner of his life. He sat down slowly, letting his tired body sink into the chair. For a moment, he closed his eyes, hoping the darkness would bring some peace. But instead, the thoughts arrived again, Fast, restless, relentless. Every worry, every regret, every unfinished responsibility came rushing back into his mind. It felt like standing in the middle of a storm, not a storm of rain or wind, but a storm of thoughts, questions without answers, problems without solutions, and the more he tried to push them away, the louder they seemed to become. Suddenly, a strange realization hit him. He couldn't remember the last time his mind had experienced true quiet. Not a few seconds of distraction, not the numbness of exhaustion, but genuine silence. The kind of silence where thoughts settle and clarity begins to appear. Years had passed in constant mental noise, work noise, city noise, social noise, internal noise. Every moment of his life filled with something demanding attention, something pulling his mind in another direction. And in that moment, sitting there in the dim light of his small room, the truth became impossible to ignore. His life wasn't just chaotic on the outside, it was chaotic inside his mind. And maybe, just maybe, the two were connected. The idea felt both uncomfortable and strangely powerful. What if the reason he felt lost wasn't just his circumstances? What if the real problem was that he had never given his mind the space it needed to think clearly? He opened his eyes slowly, and for the first time in a long time, a quiet question appeared in his thoughts, one that would soon lead to a decision that could change everything. The question lingered in his mind long after that exhausting night. What if the chaos in his life wasn't just happening to him, but also inside him? The thought felt uncomfortable, almost unsettling. Yet the more he sat with it, the more it began to make sense. Maybe his mind had simply never been given the chance to slow down. He looked around his small room again. Nothing about his circumstances had magically improved. The bills were still there, the responsibilities hadn't disappeared, and tomorrow's work would arrive just as early as always. But something inside him had shifted slightly, a quiet awareness that something needed to change. And strangely enough, the idea that appeared wasn't dramatic at all. It wasn't about quitting his job, moving to another city, or chasing some unrealistic dream overnight. Instead, the thought was simple, almost ridiculously small. What if he just woke up earlier than everyone else? Not to work, not to rush, not to scroll through news or messages, just to sit in silence. At first, the idea felt unusual. Why wake up earlier when he was already tired? Why give up precious sleep just to sit quietly in the dark while the rest of the world slept? Yet something about that quiet moment before sunrise began to feel strangely powerful. He imagined it. The world still asleep. No noise from traffic. No demands. No interruptions. Just a small pocket of time that belonged only to him. A moment where his mind could finally breathe. So he made a quiet promise to himself. Starting tomorrow, he would wake up earlier than usual. Even if it was just 15 or 20 minutes before the chaos of the day began. No phone, no distractions, just silence. He didn't expect miracles. He didn't believe his life would suddenly transform overnight. But deep down, something inside him whispered that this small decision might be more important than it seemed. Because sometimes the biggest turning points in life don't arrive through massive actions. Sometimes they begin with one quiet moment, when a person finally decides to stop reacting to life and start thinking about it. And soon, this small decision would lead him to a discovery he had never considered before. A piece of wisdom that would completely change the way he understood silence itself. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The next morning arrived earlier than usual. The sky outside was still dark, the world unusually quiet, almost as if time itself had slowed down. For a moment he wondered if waking up early had been a mistake. His body was tired, his mind still foggy, but something about the calm air around him felt different. He sat down quietly, unsure of what to do. No phone, no television, no rushing, just stillness. At first it felt awkward, like stepping into a room where you don't quite know how to behave. His mind immediately started racing again, jumping from thought to thought, problem to problem. But later that day, something unexpected happened. While walking home, he passed a small street market where an old man sat beside a table covered in worn books and handwritten notes. The old man wasn't selling aggressively or calling people over. He simply sat there calmly, watching the world move by. Something about his presence felt unusual, not powerful, Not flashy, just peaceful. The kind of calm that quietly draws attention without asking for it. And as the poor man slowed his steps, the old man looked up and smiled as if he had been expecting him. "Busy mind?" the old man asked gently. The question caught him off guard. It was strangely precise, like someone describing a secret he had never spoken aloud. He nodded without thinking, and the old man chuckled softly. Then the old man said something he would never forget. "Silence is not emptiness," he explained calmly. "It's the space where your real thoughts finally have room to speak. Most people spend their whole lives running from that space, and then wonder why they never find clarity." The words stayed with him long after he walked away. For the first time, silence didn't feel like doing nothing. It felt like something meaningful, something powerful that he had unknowingly ignored his entire life. That evening, the idea echoed through his mind again and again. Maybe those quiet early mornings weren't pointless after all. Maybe they were something deeper, a doorway into understanding himself in a way constant noise had always prevented. And the next morning, when the alarm rang before sunrise again, he was no longer waking up out of curiosity. Now he was waking up with purpose, because what he was about to build in those quiet hours would soon become more than just silence. It would become a system that slowly began reshaping his entire life. The next morning, he woke before the sun again. But this time, something felt different. The silence no longer felt strange or empty. Instead, it felt like stepping into a quiet workshop where his mind could finally begin repairing itself. For the first time in years, the morning belonged entirely to him. He didn't create anything complicated, no elaborate routine, no strict rules, just a simple ritual he repeated every day before the world woke up. He would sit in the same chair, in the same quiet corner, and allow his mind to settle into the stillness. At first, he simply observed his thoughts. Worries would appear, then slowly fade. Ideas would drift in, then drift out again. Without the pressure of noise or urgency, something interesting began to happen. His thoughts stopped colliding with each other and started forming clear patterns. Soon he added a small habit. He began asking himself one simple question every morning. What truly matters today? Not 10 things, not a long list of worries, just the one action that could move his life even slightly forward. Then he would write it down, just a few words on a small piece of paper, a decision for the day. Sometimes it was practical, calling someone about work, fixing something broken, learning a small new skill. Other times it was internal, staying calm during pressure, avoiding unnecessary distractions. This tiny ritual began sharpening his focus. Instead of reacting to whatever chaos arrived during the day, he now walked into the world with a clear intention already in his mind. And surprisingly, that single intention often changed how the entire day unfolded. Over time, the ritual grew naturally. Some mornings he would reflect on mistakes from the previous day. Other mornings he would quietly imagine the kind of life he wanted to build. Nothing dramatic, just steady, honest thinking that slowly aligned his actions with his direction. And little by little, something remarkable began happening inside him. His mind was no longer just reacting to life. It was starting to guide it. But while the ritual sounded simple, the early days would soon reveal something difficult. Because when a person finally sits in silence, they don't just discover clarity. Sometimes they first discover the thoughts they've been avoiding for years. The first real challenge didn't come from waking up early. Surprisingly, that part became easier after a few days. The alarm rang, he rose quietly, and the world before sunrise still felt peaceful. But once he sat down in the silence, something far more difficult appeared. His mind refused to stay still. Thoughts rushed in like a crowd pushing through an open door. Worries about money, memories of past mistakes, fears about the future. The silence he had hoped would calm him suddenly felt like a spotlight shining on everything he had tried to ignore. Some mornings felt especially uncomfortable. He would sit there, shifting in his chair, tempted to stand up and distract himself with something, anything, a phone, music, work, anything that could drown out the restless noise inside his head. But slowly he realized something important. The discomfort wasn't the enemy. It was simply the mind releasing everything it had been carrying for years. Thoughts that had been buried under endless distractions were finally surfacing. So instead of running from them, he tried something different. When a worry appeared, he didn't fight it. He simply noticed it. He let it pass like a cloud drifting through the sky. And strangely, the more he allowed the thoughts to come and go, the less power they seemed to have. Some mornings he wrote them down, a fear, a regret, a question about the future. Putting the thoughts on paper helped him see them clearly instead of feeling trapped inside them. Problems that once felt overwhelming often looked smaller when written in simple words. Gradually, the silence became less intimidating. The storm of thoughts began to slow. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough for small moments of clarity to appear between them. And those small moments were powerful, because in those quiet spaces, he began noticing ideas he had never considered before. Simple solutions, small opportunities, different ways of thinking about the same problems. What he didn't realize yet was that these tiny moments of clarity were quietly preparing something bigger, because soon the quiet mornings would begin producing a kind of progress he could actually see. Weeks passed, and something subtle began to shift. Not dramatically, not in a way the world could immediately see, but inside him, the quiet mornings were slowly reorganizing his mind. Thoughts that once felt tangled started lining up with surprising clarity. He noticed it first during small moments. At work, problems that once overwhelmed him now seemed easier to understand. Instead of reacting instantly, he paused, thought, and responded with calm focus. It was as if his mind had gained a small space between pressure and reaction. His emotions began changing too. Situations that once triggered frustration or anxiety no longer controlled him the same way. The quiet mornings had taught him something powerful. When the mind is calm, problems lose their ability to dominate your thinking. Decisions started becoming clearer. Before, he would overthink everything. Now, after his early morning reflections, many choices felt simpler. He had already spent time thinking about what truly mattered, so when opportunities appeared, he recognized them faster. He also began noticing how much time people around him spent reacting, rushing, complaining, worrying about things they couldn't control. And quietly, he realized that just a few minutes of morning silence had given him something many people lacked: mental distance. That distance changed his behavior. He started focusing on one task at a time instead of trying to handle everything at once. He listened more carefully in conversations. He planned small steps instead of chasing big, unrealistic solutions. None of this felt like a miracle, but it felt steady, real. The kind of slow progress that builds strength instead of temporary excitement. And then, one day, something happened that made him realize how powerful those quiet mornings had truly become. Because the clarity he had been building day after day suddenly led him to a decision, one that would open a door he had never even noticed before. One quiet morning began like any other. The sky was still dim, the city silent, and he sat in his familiar chair with a small notebook resting on his knees. By now, the silence felt natural, almost like meeting an old friend before the day began. His thoughts moved slowly, calmly. Instead of rushing through worries, he examined them one by one. That morning, his mind returned to a problem he had been facing at work for weeks. Something small on the surface, yet complicated enough that no one had managed to solve it. Before, he would have ignored it. He would have assumed someone else knew better, or that the situation was simply beyond him. But the quiet mornings had changed something inside him. They had given him the confidence to look at problems instead of running from them. So he wrote the problem down. Then beneath it, he asked a simple question. What's the smartest small step I could take today? Not the perfect solution, not a huge risk, just one thoughtful action that moved things forward. As he sat there in silence, an idea surfaced. Not a grand, complicated plan, just a different way of approaching the situation. A perspective he had never noticed before because his mind had always been too crowded to see it. Later that day, he cautiously acted on that idea. He suggested the solution during a conversation at work, expecting little reaction. But to his surprise, the people around him paused, then leaned in with interest. The idea worked, a small improvement, but a meaningful one. It solved a problem that had been slowing things down for weeks. Suddenly, people were looking at him differently, not as the tired man just trying to get through the day, but as someone who had actually contributed something valuable. That evening, as he walked home through the same streets he had crossed 1,000 times before, something inside him felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, he saw proof that clarity could turn into opportunity. And what he didn't yet realize was that this was only the beginning. Because once a person learns how to think clearly, life starts revealing possibilities that were invisible before. Months began to pass, and the quiet mornings never left him. What started as a small experiment had quietly become a foundation in his life. Before the world woke up, before the noise returned, he would sit in silence and organize his thoughts. Day after day, the habit slowly shaped the man he was becoming. The changes didn't arrive like fireworks. They came like sunrise, gradual, steady, impossible to stop once they began. His thinking grew clearer. His actions became more deliberate. Problems that once felt overwhelming now looked like puzzles waiting to be solved. People around him began noticing the difference, not just in what he said, but in how he carried himself. There was a calmness in his voice, a patience in his decisions, a quiet confidence in his movements. The man who once looked constantly stressed now seemed centered. Opportunities started appearing in unexpected ways. Sometimes it was a new responsibility at work. Other times it was someone asking for his advice, trusting his judgment, and each opportunity built on the last, slowly expanding the direction of his life. But the real transformation wasn't just external. The greatest change had happened inside his mind. The chaos that once ruled his thoughts had been replaced with something stronger: clarity, discipline, and a sense of direction. His mornings remained simple: a chair, a quiet room, a few minutes of reflection before the sun rose. Yet those silent moments had become the place where he planned his days, corrected his mistakes, and strengthened his thinking. The poor man who once felt trapped by circumstances had discovered something powerful. When the mind becomes calm, decisions become smarter. When decisions become smarter, actions become more effective. And when actions improve, life slowly follows. Years earlier, he had believed success belonged to people with better luck, more money, or special talent. Now he understood something very different. Sometimes the greatest advantage in life is simply learning how to think clearly, and that realization would soon reveal a lesson far bigger than his own story, because the quiet secret that changed his life might be available to anyone willing to try it. By the time his life had changed, the secret no longer looked like a secret at all. There was no miracle formula, no hidden opportunity, no sudden stroke of luck. What changed everything was something most people overlook every single day: a few quiet moments where the mind is finally allowed to slow down and think. Most people believe progress comes from constant motion. Work harder, move faster, do more, fill every empty minute with activity. Yet the strange truth he discovered was the opposite. The greatest turning points in his life came not from rushing, but from pausing. Silence gave his mind something it had been missing for years: space. Space to notice problems clearly, space to recognize opportunities, space to ask honest questions about where his life was going and what truly mattered. And the lesson hidden in his story is surprisingly simple. If the mind never stops receiving noise, it never has the chance to create clarity. But when you give yourself even a few quiet minutes each day, your thoughts begin organizing themselves in ways that can completely change how you live. Anyone can experiment with this. It doesn't require money, special skills, or dramatic lifestyle changes. Wake up 15 minutes earlier. Sit somewhere quiet. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just breathe and let your thoughts settle. Then ask yourself a simple question: what truly matters today? Not everything. Not every problem in your life. Just the one action that would move you slightly forward. Write it down. Focus on it during the day. Notice how your decisions begin aligning with that intention. Over time, those small moments of clarity begin stacking together, quietly reshaping the direction of your life. Because the real power of silence is not that it changes the world around you. It changes the way you think. And once your thinking changes, your path begins to reveal itself. And if a tired man who once felt trapped by noise and confusion could transform his life through a few quiet mornings, imagine what might happen if someone else decided to try the same experiment tomorrow.